we are moving on to our panel discussion. We are privileged to have as our moderator for the discussion, Madam Sandra Thompson. Ms. Sandra Thompson is a special aide to the Governor of the Bank of Ghana and an advisor on corporate governance and stakeholder management. She has recently completed her tenure as the secretary to the bank and board secretary, overseeing institutional governance, international relations, stakeholder engagement, institutional strategy, and board advisory, among other areas. She has held senior roles in legal and justice sector reforms in Ghana and internationally, and is an adjunct lawyer and lecturer at Gimpa Law School. Shall we please welcome Madam Sandra Thompson. Joining Ms. Sandra Thompson on the panel is Mr. Sena Kamagati. Mr. Sena is a chartered accountant, chartered banker, and a fellow of the Institute and Chartered Information Systems Auditor. He was appointed the executive head, retail banking at GCB Bank in January 2024, with over 15 years of demonstrable experience across finance, treasury, trade finance, external audit, and assurance service, internal audit, as well as internal control, amongst others. Please let's kindly welcome Mr. Sena as he comes upstage. We also have on the panel Mr. Ismail Adam, Esquire. Mr. Ismail Adam is the Director of Banking Supervisory at the Bank of Ghana and a legal practitioner. Having been called to the bar in 2020, he holds a BSc, MA, MPA, and LLB, and brings multidisciplinary expertise in banking regulation, supervision, and public sector governance. Please let's welcome Mr. Adam. Finally, on our panel, we have Mr. John Ewa. John Ewa is a seasoned banking executive and CEO of the Ghana Association of Banks, representing 24 member commercial banks. He previously served as Deputy CEO and held senior roles, including CEO of UMB Bank, CFO of GCB Bank, and Group CFO of EcoBank, bringing expertise in sector advocacy. Please let's welcome our final panelist, Mr. Ewa.
Good evening, distinguished invited guests, our friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. It is my utter pleasure to moderate this panel on this very important topic of bank corporate governance and financial stability, the role of bank boards. Our first speaker, Mr. Gati, has drawn the framework and given us views of the regulator's expectation. So we know by now, ladies and gentlemen, that effective governance at board level is critical. It's absolutely critical to ensuring that banks operate safely, responsibly, and in alignment with both regulatory standards and prudential regulation and stakeholder expectations. Strong corporate governance frameworks coupled with active and informed boards are critical, if not necessary, for the stability not only of individual banks, but also for the resilience of the financial system as a whole. So before we turn to our panel, let me briefly try to frame some of the key tenets of our discussion this evening. Bank boards in the context of financial stability. So we know that historically, boards were viewed largely as oversight, compliance bodies. All of that is trite knowledge. But in today's financial system, neither of those things are sufficient nor viable. Bank boards are no longer expected to just sit to approve policies, review reports, ensure adherence to rules. The modern bank board, in particular, those in the financial sectors, boards in the financial sectors are increasingly recognized as systemic actors. Their decisions shape not only institutional performance, ladies and gentlemen, and resilience, but public confidence and market trust. Bank boards are no longer seen as stewards of individual banks, but guardians of financial stability. So in systematically important banks and more importantly, or in particular in central banks, the board's decisions or failures to act can have economy-wide consequences. Distinguished guests, the modern board therefore now, operates at the intersection of strategy, risk, governance, and accountability. You heard Mr. Gatti say that you can no longer bring somebody and say, because she's my wife or my cousin, therefore she qualifies or he qualifies to be a board member. The board's role is not to manage the bank, you will hear the experts tell you in a minute, but to exercise informed judgment under uncertainty. They are the ones who set the risk appetite. They're expected to challenge management assumptions, to oversee culture and incentives, and ensure that growth, innovation, and inclusion do not undermine stability. Importantly, board effectiveness today depends less on formality and more on capability, on capacity, on independence of mind and of thinking, and quality of information. In emerging and developing markets, including West Africa, where we are situated, these expectations are further intensified. Why? Because financial systems are evolving rapidly. We're looking at issues of financial innovation, cross-border banking activity, evolving market structures. All of these increase the importance of effective board oversight as a stabilizing mechanism for assuring public trust. It is this modern concept of the board, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as a stabilizing force in an increasingly complex financial ecosystem that will guide our discussion this evening. The question before us, therefore, is not whether boards matter for financial stability. That proposition has been very well established. But how must boards evolve in composition, in capability, in mindset, and in practice to meet today's realities? To help us explore our three expert gentlemen, they bring us three divergent yet interconnected perspectives, and they have been ably introduced to you by our MC. This panel brings together the full governance ecosystem of banking in Ghana. The bank boardroom, the industry platform is represented here, and the almighty regulator and supervisor, my very own and able colleague, is also here. So we expect that our discussions will help us or allow us to move beyond theory to practical insights for boards and for regulators, including DFIs and regional institutions. And so thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the honor to moderate, and gentlemen, you are warmly welcome. I would now like to start our discussion by inviting just general comments, brief comments, to open the conversation about what your view is today on bank boards in Ghana now. What do they look like? What is the condition? Mr. Adams from Bank of Ghana.
Thank you very much, and good evening to our distinguished guests, both present here and those who are online. Let me say that governance, especially in banks, has evolved over time. At least we've moved away from the era where boards of banks were, like the first speaker said, friends and family, in mom and pop, as we say it, and for which decision making was not in the best interest of the institution. Over the years, as has been articulated here, through the reforms based on experience with the crisis between 2017 and 19, or the crisis that led to the banking sector reforms 2017 to 2019. We've seen a lot of improvement, and my colleagues will bear with me how rigorous even the onboarding process is. I understand some people, when approached to join banks boards, refuse to join because they think that the BOG is becoming too intrusive now in terms of trying to find out whether the person is fit and proper in terms of character and even in terms of knowledge and competency. And so I can say that we've moved away from where we were, and where we are now is good, but we haven't gotten to where we want to be, and we'll get there, God willing. So that's my introductory remark.
Thank you. Ms. Ewa, what are they looking like today, 2026?
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here this evening. As has been said, the governance architecture of banks, just like in any growing organism, has evolved. And in our case in Ghana, the evolution has been premised on experience. We've gone through a stage where currently where we stand, when we talk governance, is no longer theory to us because we've lived it. And as has been said, that pride comes before the fall. In organizational life, before financial crisis or capital crisis or liquidity crisis, there is a governance crisis. And that is what we have experienced. And given the interventions over the last few years that we've had, it's become from no kind of organization to at the extreme end of sometimes, as Mr. Adams mentioned, the banks even beginning to complain about you asking about where my grandmother lives before I can be on the board of a bank. But the clear thing and the departure that where I sit, seeing all the banks and their governance structures, the departure I have seen is hitherto, you could tell that some of the boardrooms were like the dinner tables at home or a church workshop. But now we've moved to a boardroom that is more diversified, more engaged, and more of acting in the supreme interest of the institutions that they represent. That is how I'll characterize the situation at the moment.
Thank you very much. We will explore the topic of diversification in a minute. Mr. Kamagati, your opening remarks on the state of bank boards today.
Okay, so let me say good evening to the listeners here and those online. Just to add a little to what Ismail and then John have mentioned. If I look back in my days as an external auditor, where I had the chance of auditing a number of banks, and today, even without getting any data, I can say that anybody who goes through the regulatory process and get into the boardroom has what it takes to actually be there. Now, we're crying about how rigorous the fit and proper persons directive was. And just this year, January, there has been a revision of that fit and proper persons directive. And the revision actually acknowledges the fact that the bank is a nexus of contract. Every single relationship you find in a bank has a contract behind it. And so, without concentrating overly on key management personnel, significant shareholders, and directors, the scope has been increased to now include third parties who would provide services for the bank. And so that is the kind of rigorous process that have been put in there. And to also say that if you look at the burden that has been placed on directors of boards, and I guess we have lawyers or either law students or practitioners here, you understand better when the word shall is used in the context of responsibility. But that's exactly what responsibilities have been placed on directors of board. They've been told, if you go to section 10 of the directive, that they shall have overall responsibility of the regulated financial institution. And so if you read this and go ahead and accept your appointment and go through the process, then I can assure you that it will take the devil to take their fiduciary relationship or responsibility for granted. So these are my initial comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kamagate. We glean from and surmise from the opening comments that the standard, the quality is better now. So is the duty of care that is placed upon board members. Let's start from the beginning. Board composition, skills, effectiveness. Mr. Adams, from the regulator's point of view, take us back from 2017 to date. What governance trends have you observed, and how does this affect the way that you regulate the banks by way of board composition, the skill and effectiveness of the boards themselves?
So thank you very much. So as I said from the opening remark, we've evolved from a period where we had mom and pop with nephews and nieces all sitting on the same board. Let me start by giving a context. When you talk of corporate governance in the layman's language, you are looking at the board and management running the affairs of the business in the best interest of all stakeholders. That's the basic definition of a good corporate governance. And when it comes to banking business, the most important stakeholder is me and you who are putting our monies in the bank. It's not the shareholder, it's not the directors, it's not the employees who are in their big ties and shoes, very nice shoes in the offices. It's the depositor who's put his money in the bank. And so how do you work very well in the interest of these stakeholders? And underpinning a good corporate governance is the issue of accountability. Are you accountable to all the stakeholders? Issue of responsibility. How responsible are you in terms of aligning what you are doing with your fiduciary duty under the Companies Act? The issue of transparency. How are you being transparent? How are you disclosing your financial information and other important information to all your stakeholders? Are you going by your fiduciary duty, as I said earlier on? And so these are the tenets, and independence of the board. Is the board independent enough? Is there any shadow director somewhere who is directing what the decisions that should be made at the boardroom? So these are the tenets of a very good corporate governance architecture. And so based on our experience with the banks prior to 2017, where we had issues of conflict of interest, issues of related party transactions, where boards were reneging on their fiduciary duty, i.e., duty of care, duty of loyalty, and sometimes even weak oversight over the banks, we had to come out with our corporate governance directive in 2018. What did that directive sought to do? And we scanned the environment locally and abroad, in international best practice, to be able to come out with that governance code. And so based on that, if we're talking about where we are now, there are so many things in the corporate governance directive now, what was issued in 2018. So now we have separation of powers. You cannot be the chair and the CEO at the same time. We used to have in the past. There are arrangements for, what do you call it? So separation of powers is there. We are giving some minimum standards in terms of competencies. We have, in terms of even numbers, we have gone beyond what the Companies Act says, that minimum of 2. We are saying minimum of 5 to ensure diversity on the board. We are looking at the competencies of the individual board members. Not only that, we are also looking at collective competency. And so if you have a 5-member board and they are all lawyers, that is no for us. If they are all economists, that is no for, because we want a blend of competencies to be able to do what is needful. And then also we have, based on our kind of international environment, we've limited the tenure of board members. You know, when you become so familiar with an environment, then sometimes you tend to do things which are untoward. And so we've limited the tenure of the directors. You cannot be on the board for more than 9 years. Even the CEO, we've limited the tenure. You cannot be a CEO for more than 12 years. If you are a chair of the board, you cannot be chair for more than 6 years. Even though you can serve all your 9 years, you can only be a board chair for a period of just 9 years. Oh, sorry, 6 years. And then also we are looking at, you know, when it comes to board members, you have people who have interest in the institution. You call them executive directors. But we are also asking that, can we get independent members on the board, people who don't have anything to do with the bank, so they can bring some perspective outside the people who have interest in the bank. And so we have given a minimum threshold for you to have those number of independent directors on the board. Committees, even committees, you have prescribed it. We are saying that at least you have 2 committees on the board. If you don't have committees at all, the committee on audit should be there, and committee of risk management should be there. Because risk management is key when it comes to banking business. And so we've given that minimum threshold in terms of committees being on the board. So looking at where you were, and based on the experience and scanning the environment, both local and internationally, and looking at best practices, this is where we are as far as corporate governance practice is concerned.
Thank you. Very comprehensive view of the regulators' framework. But can you tell the public the modalities for ensuring all of these wonderful things that you have set out?
Yes. So the starting point is let's start from the operating law, the Banks and Specialized Deposit-Taking Institutions Act, Act 930, which was passed in 2016. So the Act requires that if you are becoming a board member, or if you are becoming what we called management, going to a management position in a bank, you require approval from the Bank of Ghana. So the law is clear on that. You need approval from Bank of Ghana just to reinforce the fact that now we want to see who is coming onto the board. So the law itself has made it clear who and who, in terms of approval, Bank of giving that authority to the Bank of Ghana to approve. And so the institutions will have to apply to us that Mr. A has been nominated to serve on the board of a bank, and that's where we start from. You have to get your CV. There's a very about 12-page form that you need to fill, and that is where somebody was talking about where your grandmother lived. So on that form, of course, that form was designed together with the security agencies. So it's not like Bank of Ghana, Sumoto designed that form. We designed that form with the security agencies. And so you have to fill that form. The bank itself, so we will do our due diligence or fit and proper test on the appointee. But the bank itself is also required to do some due diligence on the person. And so aside the form, aside the CV, we need what the bank itself has done on the person. So this is submitted to us. We work closely with the security agencies and determine whether the person is fit and proper. So much as the security agencies are looking at the person's character, whether the person has committed any crime anywhere, for which we don't want to recycle that bad behavior. We are also looking at, we at the Bank of Ghana are looking at, is the person competent enough for the position or for the board membership that is being appointed to. So the combination of what our assessment in terms of the person's competency and capability, together with what the security agencies will do, will then allow us to make a determination as to whether the person can sit on the board or can be a senior member of a bank.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure that the very comprehensive review of the structure at the central bank, I'm sure at question time people would like to know more. But Mr. Wa, during Mr. Adams's presentation, he spoke about independent non-executive directors on bank boards. Indeed, the 2018 directives requires at least 30% independent directors. I want to ask you, from industry's perspective, what is their impact? What has been their impact? Because people ask, why do we need an independent? Who is an independent person? And how do we even judge independence? Is independence of mind or of being? What is their impact?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. It all boils down to where we are coming from, given the scenario and the preamble that we've run through as to the kind of boards we used to have in place, where everybody on the board was connected in one way or the other to everybody else. And there was somebody sitting at the table who was more or less like the head of dining table for a home dinner table. And I think the central bank's objective was, how do we break away from this so we can have people whose sole interest is in the survival and the proper operations of the organization. So if you pick a typical board, you have the executive directors, maybe the managing director, the CFO, and one or two people who will be part of the board. They have a certain association with the organization. And depending on how the organization is set up, whether there are two major shareholders or a few shareholders, there's a shareholder agreement that may also say the shareholders may appoint one or two people each, depending on how the various pillars within the shareholding structure is organized. Then you find that, okay, the executive directors are closely connected in one way or the other to the organization. So their future is tied more or less to the survival of the organization. And then you have the shareholders who set up this business, whose future is also more or less tied to the success or otherwise of this organization. So they may all be tilted towards a certain objective. But can we have people at the table whose job will be to ask the difficult questions? The questions that may call for certain course of action that may not yield immediate results, but may be good for the long-term survival of the organization. And that is what you get from the independent directors.
Where do they come from? We have students here.
So
Who becomes an independent? Where
Okay.
do we find them?
So I think it's a good question. The independence is basically grounded in how they get onto the board. How do these people get on the, what is their mode of connection to the organization? So there is Bank A, the bank has a board, and we say we are looking for independent director. In most of the boardrooms, the charter of the board will determine the route that one may use in attracting an independent person onto the board. But generally, from experience, what we've seen is most of the banks appoint a consulting firm to help them to scan through the environment, because by then you know your executive directors, you know the other people who may be connected to the organization. So the independent person may also be coming as a balancing force, first in competence and also in independence. So if everybody, as Sina mentioned, is already like about a greater percentage of them are either accountants or lawyers, the independent person, when the consultant is looking for such a person, is looking at what kind of diversity is this person bringing onto the board. And what they do, the independent directors mostly chair the committees of the board, and I believe the board chairman or chairperson should or must of necessity also be an independent director, so that in steering the affairs of the organization, there is no emotional attachment to some of the decisions, because some decisions are very tough. And there are decisions you take that if you are an MD, you know that it means next year you are not going to make profit. If you are not making profit next year, I may not get bonus next year. But the organization overall may be very successful in 3 or 5 years' time. If you are not lucky, you may not be there to enjoy that 5 years. And that is why you can be very short term in some of your decisions. And you need the independent director to steer the organization through that straight and narrow, so that the utmost objective of the organization reigns supreme. So that is how the independent directors moderate the conduct of the board, and also ensures that the board has a proper balance in decision making, and that is not swayed, almost entirely to the whims and caprices of a certain group. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, please do go ahead.
So, just to add a little to the description of the independent directors, as John has mentioned, it comes through how you join the board. But what Bank of Ghana has done in the corporate governance directive is to give some prescriptions. The conversation around independence, maybe it's only God who can really judge who an independent person is. And so Bank of Ghana tries to cure this with some prescription. So it says, for instance, if you share cross-directorship with a board member, you cannot be an independent member. And cross-directorship, let's say Sina sit on the board of Unilever with Sandra here. If we meet on the board of GCB, we are disqualified from calling ourselves independent. If you have significant shareholding, and the way Bank of Ghana describes significant shareholding is more than 5%. And the Company Act does not bar shareholders from sitting on the board. By the moment you are a significant shareholder, you cannot call yourself an independent director. If you have had a significant transaction with the board, with a bank 2 years before you join, again, Bank of Ghana would say no. If you have a relative who is a key management personnel, Bank of Ghana again will say you are not. But it gets interesting when it gets to government-owned banks. The moment it's a government-owned bank, Bank of Ghana says we are the only ones who can determine an appointee of a government bank to be independent or non-independent. So when it gets there, Bank of Ghana maybe assumes the position of a supreme being and is able to enter into the minds of the people and say, as for you, I know you can be independent, but you cannot. So those are some of the description. But as John said, in a country like Ghana, where people are connected at the secondary school, JSS, and I can say that you will struggle to get appointed to a board if you don't have a connection. Because I can't remember when last I saw an advert in any of the delis for a board member into a bank. So headhunting. So for your head to be hunted, somebody must have seen how big your head is. We'll leave those conversations for the professionals to do. But there's a cure, and for me, the cure in determining whether you are independent or not is how rigorous the fit and proper person process is. I can tell you, the first time I went through the process, it took me 6 months, 6 good months, for my clearance to come. And they visited my poor old lady in the village. And then she calls me and says, what have you gone to do? Some people have come here. I said, which people? I will later on find out that some security officials traveled all the way to our village to go and find out if I was a bad boy growing up. So I think that gives us some cure. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sina Kamagati. But I would like you now to link diversity to independence. How has your bank in particular seen any improvement on its board and the board decisions as a result of diversity?
Okay, so look, so the point is, why do we need diversity on the board? We are solving for one thing. What has killed a lot of corporate entities is groupthink. Groupthink. I'm telling you, if you have a board of 8 and you have 5 lawyers, they will be putting it to one another. I'll put it to you, I'll put it to you, I'll put it to you. Before you realize, no decision would be made. And they all walk away. If you bring 7 accountants, this one will be quoting IAS 39, this one will quote IFRS 9. By the time you realize, no decision will be taken. If you have BA, this one will be discussing how Socrates solved the problem that Pluto didn't like it. And so the whole idea is that let's create some flexibility around how people think. And so I don't even look at it from only the point of view of diversity, because that's limiting. We are looking at inclusiveness. We are looking at equity. And so in our bank, for instance, we should have female professionals sitting on our board. And that's a matter of policy. There are certain professional backgrounds that we must get. And that also is a matter of policy. So the way we have achieved this is to make sure that we have defined it in policy. Because Bank of Ghana would just tell you, we need you to have some diversity. But how that gets operationalized would sit with the regulated financial institutions. And so the shareholder or their representative, when they are making these appointments, would have to make the appointment taking into consideration what the policy is. So if we say, for instance, GCB, we should have at least 2 female board members. That's at least. And so today we have 2 sitting in there. The board before, we had 2. We should have a lawyer. We should have an accountant. We should have somebody who has a risk management background. So I remember somewhere in 2017, we needed to have an IT expert. And around that time, you wouldn't find a lot of these experts easily. So that's when a proper headhunt had to be done. And eventually, we found one. And when he joined the board, we actually appreciated the essence of diversity. because he brought certain color to our digital transformation agenda, and that's actually helped the bank. So the way we look at it is from a DEI point of view: diversity, equity, and then inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. And who's speaking for the youth? Who's
Yeah,
speaking for
yeah.
the youth? I'm
That is-
thinking fintech, innovation.
And that is exactly what I wanted to add to what Cinda just talked about. If you have a boardroom and everybody, because we have to look at diversity also in demographics properly. And if everyone on the board is 60 and above, or below 30, you don't have the right mix of demographic in terms of age brackets. We are in an environment where things are evolving very quickly, and we all know, those of us here who are parents and have teenage children, you find that there are things on the TV that you dare not even try to understand, but everybody in your house know. You know, the kids, they can just and they are there. So in this era where we are talking about AI, we are talking about cybersecurity, we are talking about cryptocurrency, virtual assets, and all these complicated areas of technology and how financial services, digital financial services is evolving, diversity should include who do we put on the board to give us the perspective from the youthful population of the country? Somebody who has the right understanding of how the youth process information. If we open these big doors here, and there's a small door in the middle, it will surprise you that when we are filing out, every one of us here and the old guys will go through the big door, but so people will be squeezing to pass through the small door. That is how they process exit. So how do we get this kind of thinking into even the bank's own products? So diversity should also be seen not just from gender or a diversity in thinking and competence and qualification, also in even age and buckets as well, so that the board decision can be seen from all angles. And we started by saying, what is the role of the board? The board sets the tone. They set the risk appetite of the bank. They set the risk tolerance of the bank. And if you come to the credit committee of a board or even a bank, management credit committee, and you sit, either you are chairing or you are a member, and you check the table, and you find the legal person, the risk person, the finance, the treasurer is there, the compliance person may be there, somebody is there, control function is there. You will find that the direction of questioning of the risk is so different depending on people's orientation and background. So it's important that we find all these aspects of looking at the risk in the boardroom, so that the risk is not seen only from a financial perspective of what is the benefit to the organization, or only from the legal perspective, oh, what if he doesn't pay and there's no proper recourse, or only from compliance perspective, oh, have they done EPA certificate? But it is seen in totality. The entire enterprise risk mindset goes into the decision-making process. And that is where, if you are somebody who is youthful, may also be asking you, how do we even monitor this remotely? What kind of systems can we implement or do we have in place to ensure that instead of the project is in Tamale, we are giving the credit here, we don't have to be in Tamale every time to see that the credit is performing. How do we have some systems to manage the credit on an ongoing basis? So you need that broad pockets and pieces of diversity, each constituency duly represented in the board decision.
Each constituency duly represented. We understand that a strong board is not a large board. It is a capable board, and above all, a balanced board. Mr. Johnny, thank you for bringing us to the topic of risk management, because I'd like us to spend the next few minutes discussing board oversight vis-a-vis risk management. We understand now that boards must act as guardians of risk discipline. The idea, ladies and gentlemen, being that risk appetite is not a document, it is a governance discipline. And so, Mr. Ismail Adams, what does the regulator expect boards to understand, not just to approve when it comes to risk?
Thank you very much. And so let me start by saying that banks are in the business of risk taking. We cannot run away from it. They mobilize funds from those who have excess and then convert it to credit for those who need funding. And so through that transmission mechanism, there are a lot of risks that banks are exposed to. But in the midst of that risk, is also the issue of how do you manage risk. And that is why it's very important for risk management to be taken seriously by banks. Let me also say that when it comes to banking business, we say banking business is a highly leveraged business. Highly leveraged business meaning that with your capital, assuming you even have a capital of 1 billion, you can leverage on that to take deposit from me and you to the tune of about 10 billion. And if we are not able to manage the risk very well, what happens is that we take deposit, convert it to credit, don't manage our risk well, and then the credit facility becomes toxic on the balance sheet of the bank. And that is why risk management is very important for the banking sector. And so when it comes to in fact, in the corporate governance directive to banks, it puts responsibility on the board, that the board is responsible for the risk appetite of the bank, the tolerance level, managing the risk, and all that. It puts that responsibility squarely on the board. And so the board has to set that tone. And we always say that if you are a board member, or the board responsibility actually is to send a tone at the top that ensures that the risk culture in the institution promotes and reinforces ethical behavior. That is also key, because if that ethical behavior is not there, you may have other issues. You may have a very strong, in terms of the processes, very strong processes in place, but if that ethical behavior is not there, you may be fighting a losing battle. And so what we encourage board members to do, set the tone at the top, set the standards for risk management, be it the credit risk or any other risk that your operations are exposed to. Communicate that risk to all levels in the institution. So here you are passing on the issue of risk culture and how to manage whatever risk that you are exposed to, communicating that to management to the staff and everybody in the chain. So you understand the kind of business that you are doing, the kind of risk that you are exposed to, and how and when you need to minimize or mitigate that kind of risk. And so what we have done is, for now, we have given them, Kenneth mentioned it, giving them a general risk management directive. But we are going beyond that to look at specific risk. And so given the different directive with expectation from the regulator on how to manage your credit risk, and then another one that will how to manage your liquidity risk, and even how to manage your operational risk, as well as the other risks that banks are supposed to. And so we have a general framework for managing risk, and it's up to banks to abide by those risk management directives, as well as their own internal risk management policies that they have to ensure that risks that banks are exposed to are mitigated in the interest of the stakeholders that I mentioned, for which I mentioned that the most important one is the depositor. Yeah, thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Ismail Adams. We've spoken and made reference to emerging technologies like blockchain and AI. Mr. Sina Kamagate, how should boards adapt their risk oversight to manage digital vulnerabilities that did not exist in the past?
Yeah. So when I started, I mentioned that the responsibility that the corporate governance directive has placed on the boards is very, very Herculean. Now, if you look at the Cyber and Information Security Directive, from Bank of Ghana, it is clear what the responsibilities of boards are when it comes to the cyber and then information security area of things. Now, look at a bank that has embarked on a digital transformation agenda. You are saying you want to use artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities to learn from data that you have so that you can predict how your customers are going to behave in the next move. And you have a board person sitting at the top who probably would meet every quarter to shoulder the responsibility of making sure that even as you collect customers' data, that data is not used for purposes that the customers have not consented. And so, what the role of the board is around one, making sure that they set the direction as far as the bank's exposure to cyber and information security is concerned. So, whatever gets regulated gets done. And so the board would first of all need to define with clarity what the bank's direction around AI, artificial intelligence. These days, they've gone beyond artificial intelligence. We are now discussing agentic intelligence. That's where we've gotten to. We are discussing stable currency, Bitcoin. Bank of Ghana has now worked with Parliament to come out with Virtual Asset Service Providers Act. And so, as a board member, it is your responsibility that you appoint key management personnel who have the knowledge to lead direction as far as this is concerned. And so, you are setting policy, you are appointing key management personnel who have the expectation, and set clear performance guidelines as far as these are concerned. Now, if you are a board member, your responsibilities generally would be grouped into three. Your responsibility around oversight, and that is like the big man in the room, making sure that everybody is doing as we have agreed. It's about foresight. Today we say we are in a VUCA world. The world is volatile, it is uncertain, it is complex, it is ambiguous. But it takes the vision of board members to be able to go around this. And in that regard, it is expected of boards that where they do not have the competence internally to oversee these activities, they engage third parties to help them in exercising this oversight. Again, they are supposed to bring insight. Insight to the extent that you are appointed to the board because we say you have passed a certain fit and proper person. So you have the competence. So we expect you to bring direction in terms of insight. And more importantly, be able to, in your foresight responsibility, look at horizon risks and what can actually happen in the next 2 years. And so, from every indication, they are expecting even the board members to have prophetic capabilities, because it takes prophetic capabilities for you to see what can happen in the next 2-3 years so that we guard around it. And so it comes with experience. So what should boards do around this? If they do not have the competency around the emerging areas, Bank of Ghana has made it clear that where you don't have the expertise, you can rely on third parties, but you just have to go through the outsourcing policy. And in recent time, the fit and proper persons directive is capturing these third parties. You can engage them to help you. And the bit around diversity, you may not even achieve the diversity by having the youth sitting there. But for instance, if the board is going for their meetings to discuss IT and cyber security, you can co-opt about 3-4 of these youth who are savvy in the area to join you in that conversation. And that is when you realize that you are a living dead as a board member, because you would end up turning, and if you are not careful, by the time that engagement is done, you would have neck issues, because what the person sitting behind you will tell you something that will capture your attention. You turn, the next person, the next user will say, everybody will say. And so accept your vulnerabilities as a board. If you don't have the expertise, call for help, and make sure you have the policy, you have the people, and you have the procedure manual that can set the tone for everybody to follow.
Mr. What seems you want to add to that? Thank you. These are practical living examples that can aid boards.
Yeah, and there is one pitfall that I would like to bring to our attention. When we talk about board composition and we talk about expertise and the right qualification, it's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. You see, there is that danger of having very, very, very qualified people on your board. They have all the competencies, they have all the qualifications, all the exposure one would look for, and they look very flashy, being on your board. But you will find that their commitment to the board is weak. They have everything. They take in fact, they will go through the fit and proper test or requirement with ease. But how do you judge how the person is going to be committed on an ongoing basis? And that is where the board evaluation process is important. Because at any stage in time, we need to know how the board together is performing, and individually how we are all contributing to the delivery of the board mandate. So having a John Ewua sitting on your board is not enough. How am I executing my work as a director on the board? Am I over-exerting myself? And that is why Bank of Ghana, in their wisdom, came out with the maximum number of boards you can serve on if you are on a board of a bank. Because there are people in this country who are on about 12 boards. If you are on 12 boards or 15 boards, how efficient can you be? So you cannot be, I think it's not more than 4 boards if you want to be on the board of a bank, so that you can dedicate your qualification that we say you have, the expertise we say you have. You can also, in addition, dedicate your time and commitment to the work of the board. Board work is not easy. It's a very difficult work, and if you read the Companies Act and the directives that have come, the responsibility and potentially liability that as a director you can assume is quite pronounced. And before you accept, and no wonder now people are drawing back when we call them, we want to put you on a bank board.
Mr. Adam, in 1 minute, because I'm prompted that we are running out of time. Please go ahead.
So like Rari said, we've limited, because we know commitment is key when it comes to board work, we've limited it to 5. If we're more than 5, you cannot, if we have already 7 or 5 board, means you cannot sit on the board of a bank in Ghana. So that's how we've done it. But in addition to that, see, in addition to the Corporate Governance Directive, we also have Corporate Governance Directive disclosure requirements. And one of the requirements, one of the disclosure requirements is to, in your annual accounts, indicate who and who on your board, how many board meetings were held, how many meetings did Mr. A attend, how many board meetings did Mr. B attend. We try to do that just to encourage people that we are in the era of disclosure. And so if you are going to sit on a board and you are not having time for that bank that you are sitting, the bank board that you are sitting on, you'll be exposed to all stakeholders when the annual reports are published.
Thank you. Because of the brevity of time, I will ask the questions under the broad themes. Financial stability, Mr. John Ewua. what one thing would you say in 1 minute do bank boards still struggle to meet vis-a-vis the demands of today's financial system?
I would say keeping pace with the change that we are seeing. The regulator, before regulator comes up with a regulatory requirement, between you and me, what they are regulating would have happened maybe 2 or 3 years before, because you cannot regulate that which does not exist. But the board must know that before the regulator comes in. So keeping pace with the level of change we are witnessing, I see as a very big pain point for banks. And that is where, as an association, we have also taken it upon ourselves to bring the boards of the banks together in continuously developing them and exposing them to new phenomena, like as we've passed the virtual assets service providers act now is a law. We have it in our plan either this month or early part of next month to organize all the directors of all to take them through the requirements of that act, together with the other frameworks that have been issued around virtual assets, digital financial services, cryptocurrency. There's also a framework on cryptocurrency at the moment. So we need, because you cannot oversee that which you don't understand. The management can come and run its mouth on the board, but it will take a board member who understands exactly what management is saying to question. Because governance breaks down when governance fails to question. And what are you if you do not understand? So appreciation, there are things going on that if you are a director, you can be lost in the melee, and if you are not careful, you lose sight of the key that are developing and potentially can hurt your institution. And one quick one, you said 1 minute, I apologize. One quick one is on this movement galore from brick and mortar things happening in the air. As we are sitting here, I'm sure there's somebody here who may have done a transfer. So the fact that banking is moving away from physical presence to ability to transact, how would a bank be able, or a director be able to understand this, so that when management comes to the board, they can ask the questions that will put management to the test, to think broadly around how the bank survives into the future. And this future is a very near future.
This question provides serious food for serious thought. In 1 minute, then, Mr. Sina Kamagati, what one value do boards, modern bank boards, add to financial stability in Ghana today?
Well, the value they bring to the table is that which has been defined in the Corporate Governance Directive, the Companies Act, and all the relevant directive, is for them to oversee, to provide insight, and to provide some foresight. But over and above that, they are supposed to be that vessel that will move the activities of the bank into where the shareholders expect to be. But as I say this, and as I measure the weight of responsibility we have placed in them, I ask the question whether we are taking care of them in a way that makes them bring the value we expect. And that brings into question, how do we compensate boards? The Bank of Ghana's directive doesn't go into details in terms of prescription, whether boards are paid only allowances, whether they are paid retainers, whether they are entitled to bonuses, and what the compensation scheme, whether share options. And so if we expect proper value, and John mentioned, I mean, after 60, you need a certain level of survival. And so if you can get onto 5 boards, why not? But if you have that single board of a bank, that requires you to even have an office. That's my view. If you are sitting on a bank board, I think that you should create an office for yourself and constantly be keeping track of banking, because every single minute there's a change in banking. And you don't expect these board members to come maximum 4 hours after every 3 months to provide that kind of oversight you are asking for. Yes, you would say they have put in internal controls, there is an audit, there is compliance, but there's a limit to which these functions can set for you. And so the value is that which has been prescribed. But if we really want to earn that value, I think we should take a second look at how we compensate our boards. It is not for any reason that in the UK a whole committee was set, now called the Greenbury Committee, to just research into how boards must be compensated, because it has a correlation with the level of independence, with the level of expertise they will bring on the table. So if I have anything to say, I would tell my brother Ishmael here, is that we should do further work on how bank boards must be compensated. And if we did, we would expect the value that would ensure financial stability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Mr. Ismail Adams has taken notice of that board compensation. As we bring our discussion, wrap it up to a close, I'd like us to labor just a tad on the impact of the recent regulatory reforms. Mr. Adam, in a minute, one key impact of the 2017 crisis on today's modern bank board.
Yes, so thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the topic for the discussion was dear to me, because Bank of Ghana has that dual mandate of price stability and financial stability. And so to connect the board to that key mandate was something that we are very happy with. Well, so as we've discussed over and over, based on the reforms that has taken place, reforms relating to the directive on corporate governance itself, as well as the directive on disclosures, we've seen some improvement in terms of banks' management, in terms of the corporate governance architecture. We've seen a lot of improvement. Now we see a lot of coordination also between the bank, as in Bank of Ghana, and the banks. And normally we do this through the association, who's executive secretary, whose CEO is sitting with us. And so we are able to, if there are issues that we need to discuss together, there's a mechanism or there's a medium where we do that communication, just to make sure that the governance architecture, the risk management architecture, internal control functions, the board, management oversight are all working together in the interest of the banks doing what is right. And they believe that once the banks do what is right, then that mandate of financial stability will be achieved. And so the directives have been provided, coupled with other engagement that we have. You know of our regular interactions with the banks every other month.
Yes.
And so that interaction is really helping. It brings out a lot of issues from their perspective, and then based on that, we are able to resolve. And I think all that is shaping the governance architecture of banks, which is helping to sustain the banks and also help to promote financial stability. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Msewa, any thoughts?
If I were to ask to pick one I will talk of the disclosure requirements. Hitherto, corporate governance was more or less limited to the boardrooms of the banks. It was not visible enough. So now, you don't just preach corporate governance as a compliance activity. It should be in the DNA of the board. Effective corporate governance must be visible, it must be measurable, and it must be auditable. And in the end, we are moving governance accountability from the boardrooms to the public. So now how accountable you are. If you read the audited financial statement, you will find a whole several pages on corporate governance, how the boards have taken the decisions they have taken, even on compensation structure. Senator talked about the board remuneration, the compensation structure of the organization, how compensations have been structured, how board effectiveness in terms of attendance, meetings, regularity of meetings, is all there. So we are not restricting. It's not something that you say, oh, our bank is organized well. They say by their deeds ye shall know them. So if you look at the annual report, you can see clearly how this bank is organized and how it's being operated. So I think it is a very important tool. The directives itself was good, but the disclosure directives even makes it much better.
Thank you, Sewa. I think we will give a couple of minutes to our audience so that they can pose some questions to our distinguished panel. I think we have mics going round. Any questions? We have a question in the front. Okay.
Thank you very much. Respectfully, my question has to do with how the corporate governance framework is able to marry expertise with diversity, especially when we are talking about special institutions such as a bank, where one is required to have a certain kind of knowledge to be able to understand how the bank is being operated. So how does the framework marry getting people from different backgrounds with the kind of expertise they are required to have to sit on such the board of such a specialized institution? Thank you very much.
Any other questioner? Okay, we have two on this side and one in the front, please. We'll take a few questions and then the panel will address them.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Kenneth Kwejobi. I would like to comment on 3 issues, but I'll make them brief. The first one has got to do with external auditing of our banks. In all the presentations about the good corporate governance, I didn't hear much about the role that external auditors play in the financial reporting of banks. And I would like to let us have a very good look. When we take the banks that collapsed, we realize that some of them were presenting financial audited reports annually, but we have never heard that any external auditor was held accountable for the banks that collapsed. If it were outside, this would have been a very, very serious activity. So we need to look at, we can have all the nice corporate governance activities, but if external audit that is supposed to present financial reporting is missing in these corporate governance systems, then we'll continue to have challenges. The second point is about bank ownership. We have realized that directors mostly are those who are expected to own the banks in some jurisdictions. And if we are now bringing in independent directors who may not have contributed much to the capital contribution of the bank, how do we expect that their decisions would impact the ownership of the bank properly? So the governance system needs to be looked at in terms of the ownership of the banks and how reports can get to these owners in respect of the governing structures that we are setting up. My last point is about staffing. When we look at most of the banks, staffing is mostly outsourced, and you don't have some of the commitment that most of these staff would have as a permanent job and loyalty to the bank itself. So with most of these outsourced staff and others, you know that you don't have that kind of job security. So when decisions are asked for you to be implemented, all that you need to do is to let it go, because the moment you open your mouth too wide, then of course you are in trouble and you may lose your job. Probably just permit me to add that the Bank of Ghana too, in terms of supervision, we have read in all our news everywhere that they are not visible at all the regions and other locations. Fortunately, the head of the banking supervision was my mate, so he understands the point that I want to raise. How far have we gone to as we speak in making Bank of Ghana available at all regions and so many locations so as to impact supervision and then ensure that most of these board decisions that impact bank operations are properly addressed? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Shall we take, okay, can we take one from the front and then we have one here and then we'll answer them. Your name and where you are coming from.
Thank you. My name is Kwabena Frifa, and I'm a financial analyst.
Thank you.
Right, so I want to believe that framers of our constitution acknowledge the importance of good corporate governance. So when you look at Article 285, it states that no person shall position as chairman of a governing body of a public institution while simultaneously holding a position in that very institution. However, the Constitution provides an exception in 183 for the central bank, allowing the governor to effectively... The exception is provided for the central bank, effectively allowing the governor, who is, per the Banking Act, he's a CEO of the central bank, allows him to be CEO and then chair the board. Now, without prejudice to the work of committee of experts who, put together the Constitution, I'd like to gain some insight into what informed the decision to allow that exception. Because obviously, it's not in line with what the central bank itself expects of banks down the line, you understand? And secondly, according to the same Banking Act, the chief internal auditor is to report to the board. But if you reconcile that with the current corporate governing structure of the central bank, where the governor is at the top and he's also at head of management, how effective is a chief internal auditor? So this is all to throw light on the Bank of Ghana as a regulator of banks, expecting best practice. I'm interested to know how internally the corporate governance structure of the Bank of Ghana is working. Thank you so much.
Very well. Shall we attempt some answers? The first question was on diversity and expertise. I think that was thoroughly treated at the beginning. So perhaps the questioner was not here.
Let's provide.
Yes.
Yeah, just except what you're saying is there are some pillars within the diversity and inclusion discussions that do not have the requisite qualification that we can tap into. But diversity is about being intentional. So if you are being intentional about who you want and what kind of qualification you are looking for, what color of person you are looking for, you will definitely find. So it's about being intentional. If you are looking for a risk person and you want a female risk person, if you are intentional about it, you will find a female risk person. If you leave it to chance, then you will find a situation where in your boardroom you have the same kind of people sitting around the table. It's all about planning. And the other one, the role of the external auditor, I think is a very important question. But because of what they do, some of the sanctions they go through sometimes don't feed back to the public. But some external audit firms were penalized for what happened in the banking sector cleanup. Some of them were duly penalized. And again, as we said, the corporate governance directive came as a consequence of the banking sector cleanup. And one of the things that came with the directive is the rotation of auditors. Because, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt. Some of these auditors have been there forever. So now there is a requirement to rotate your external auditor. It's in the Companies Act, anyway, the new one, but also in the Bank of Ghana directive about the rotation of auditors so that new guys will come and then we know what the other guys did and then we can move forward. There's a lingering problem. I mean, I see it as a problem, and I'm happy that you've highlighted it. The problem with outsourced staff and the level of commitment and potentially how susceptible they become to fraud and other consequential happenings within the banks. It's an ongoing debate, but as to whether they have job security or not, they are outsourced to the bank, but they have permanent appointments with the outsourced organization. So their job security is not necessarily in doubt. If you are working with GoCrest or is it Westec, you are a full-time employee of Westec, but you are working in a bank. It does not make your job security or job insecure, but because of the variations in compensation, it could potentially, perhaps, affect the way you perform when you are in the bank. And yeah, I think the rest, at the bank ownership and independent directors and their impact. To be honest, I think that is even the more reason why you need that separation of powers. Because if you are a shareholder and you are sitting at your own board taking all the decisions, you can be very narrow in your thinking. And the role, as we said before, what the independent directors are supposed to do is to challenge the status quo because they don't have much to lose in terms of they have everything to gain if the organization moves forward. Their job is to put their professional competence and make it available to the organization. So in fact, it's the best practice is to have as many of them around your table as possible because of the independence of mind and the thoughtfulness in the decision making. They are very long term in nature. They don't gain from the short term happenings within the organization. They are there and they come to do a job and go. So I believe, unless you have maybe a research paper to the contrary, you rather have to be even advocating for a lot more of independent minds on our board than less of them. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. John Ewa. Please go ahead.
So just to add to John around ownership and the board membership, actually is the reverse of what you asked that we observe during the crisis. So just for academic purposes, let's look at the banks that went down. For each of these banks, you would find ownership presence at the board. For all so there were 34, so it means 11 banks were either amalgamated or dissolved. But for all of them, you found shareholder presence on the board. Now, the agency theory around how bank funding should be is that, look, Ishmael mentioned that you need only 400 million Ghana cedis to start a bank in Ghana. Yes. Only 400 million Ghana cedis. No, but the only is in context. You know, you can raise, there are banks in Ghana who have 40 billion monies belonging to all of us here. So if you are bringing only 400 million to start and you can get up to 40 billion, the report that came after the resolution actually pointed that in most of the cases, the initial capital that were brought in found their way out of the bank back to the shareholders. So what happens? You leave the bank with a shell of shareholders' commitment. And it would only take the independent mind to say that, look, I'll not do it. And if you observe, just again for academic purposes, in the case of Capital Bank, the CEO who later became the hero actually had written a long email to the board and told them that because of this, I'm checking out. He left. Not long after he left, they couldn't honor their obligation. And so, I don't know, like John mentioned, I don't know if there's a research paper, but that's the point. It's important that we get a lot more independent mind, and if possible, the shareholders must stay very far from the bank and only come in when they have to make appointment and then get their dividend as well. Now, on the bit around the role of the external auditors, look, if you have picked the engagement letters that are shared by external auditors, even before they start their work, they put in clear disclaimers. They tell you that it is the responsibility of the board to set policies that would run the bank, and that the assurance they are giving to you is not absolute, but what? Reasonable assurance. And that is why you will find that when it comes to agreed upon engagement, like you are going to invest in a bank, and then you call in a reporting auditor to say, go in there and review the company and give me advice whether I should go ahead and buy or not, then there is a certain liability. And in all cases of auditors' liability, it has been the case of agreed upon procedures, or where there is manifest evidence that there was a dereliction of duty. And so that's on the side. And maybe the reporting lines of the chief internal auditor, yes, you are right. The chief internal auditor reports functionally to the audit committee of the board, and then administratively to the CEO. Now, you, the chief internal auditor, you have the option to respect the tenets of your profession and make sure the right thing is done, and where you are faced with challenge, you resign if you are courageous enough, because that's actually what it is. That's why Bank of Ghana has a whistleblow mechanism. Even at the country level, there's a whistleblow. If you think things are not going right and you don't have your independence, there's somewhere you must run to. But again, we all know what happens after you run to those places. So you need to check the balance and do the right things in a way that protects, one, your credibility as an auditor. That is very, very important. The only thing that makes auditors who they are is the credibility and the independence they bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sina. Got to be comprehensive questions. Mr. Adam?
So let me fill in on the question on the That's a big one. And then one raised by my good friend, Dr. Obi. So, Doc, on having supervisory structures in the districts or the regions, it is something that we tried somewhere in 1993, between 1993 and 1996, if I remember, in Kumasi. But along the line, they were brought back to Accra. As to why that experiment didn't work, I cannot put my finger on it. But it's something that you can explore again. If you are into academia, if maybe you can share something that you have done on the positives of having decentralizing supervision, maybe you can share with us to make a good case at my own level. But it's something that we tried before when I joined Bank of Ghana as a young officer. We had some of our supervisors in Kumasi, but they were recalled back to Accra. As to why they were recalled, I cannot put my finger on it. On the issue of why the Bank of Ghana governor is also the board chair, then when you ask the question, I refer the question to the advisor on governance to the governor. But I'll try and I'll attempt an explanation, even though I believe it's above my pay grade. But I'll try to to. So if you are a lawyer, right? Oh, you're not. Okay, so the lawyers here will tell you that there is a theory called legal positivism, where they say the law is as it is and not what it ought to be, right? The lawyers say, when you see the lawyers, they will tell you, say the law is what it is and not what it ought to be. So ordinarily, based on good practice, you don't combine chair and COC at the same time in most jurisdictions. But see, when it comes to central banking, it's like a special area. And it's not only in Ghana that we have the chair and the CEO at the same time. I think it's in UK and some other jurisdiction. And it's all because of the special nature of the activities of the central bank and how fast and how swift you need to take certain decisions at certain times. And so there are underlying reasons why, in the wisdom of the lawmakers, made the governor the CEO, like day-to-day operations in terms of the operational activities, and also the chair. I think there may be a very good reason for that, given that it's not only in Ghana that we have that. But as I said, from what I have seen of central banking, I believe it's because of the peculiar nature of banking, central banking operations, and the swift and fast manner within which decisions have to be made. And then on the issue of the chief internal auditor reporting to the board, where the governor sits at the chair. And so we have structures within the Bank of Ghana board. We have committees, and one of the committees is the audit committee. And so it's not like the internal auditor who audit Bank of Ghana will report straight to the chair. No, he reports to the audit committee, which is chaired by an outsider or an independent member of the board. So this is just an attempt. As I said, this question is above my pay grade, but I try to proffer some answers to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And so from our online listeners, very quick questions, gentlemen, yes or no answers. Rhoda JP Gabra says, please can a board chair continue on the board as a director after his tenure? Yes, Rhoda, the answer is yes. Sam Kobe Hagan says, does the 12 years limit for a CEO only apply to banks, or it applies to every corporate governance structure? Banks only, Sam. And then Joyce's question has been dealt with, but I think, she says, how does a bank demonstrate with documented evidence that the appointment of each independent director fully complies with the Bank of Ghana's independence criteria, both in form and in substance?
So as I said, the initial point is for the bank itself to do the due diligence and make sure that indeed the person being appointed satisfy our prescription when it comes to appointment of independent directors. But beyond that, we also have our own way, because there are instances where we have our own way of checking. There are instances where a bank will insist that this is an independent director, but it comes to us, and based on our assessment, based on our review, we can make a determination that even though you think that this is an independent director, based on our review and based on our assessment, we don't think this person is an independent director. In fact, the Corporate Governance Directive has prescribed who can be considered as, and it's very clear. It's very clear over there. Just that the feedback that we have had from the public is that why did we leave out old students association? So people think that at that forum, the connection there is even more than a man and a wife or a man and a son. And so the feedback from the industry is that we need to look at old students association and its membership, because there's a very strong connection there that we have not looked at. So we have the prescription to guide the banks. As I said, the banks themselves will do their own analysis before they even come to us. And then when it comes, based on what we also have in the Corporate Governance Directive, we'll do that analysis to determine whether the person is indeed independent or not.
Thank you very much. I'm informed by the organizers that we still have a lot of questions, and so we will take just 2 questions before we bring our proceedings to a close. 2 questions. The mics are coming round. We have a gentleman in the front, and there's a lady.
Thank you all for that insightful presentation. I'm Nanisi Ahoy, and I'm actually with Bank of Ghana. But my question is going to Stewa and our honorable speaker here. And it has to do with the performance evaluation of the board. Would you say that the board of banks have gone from a performance evaluation as a tick box exercise or a checkbox exercise to actually being more interested in improving the performance of the boards and the individual members, and also seeing how improving upon their role in terms of financial stability? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last question from the gentleman, white shirt, in the middle. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for your presentations. It was very insightful. My name is Michael Andrew Akola. I'm a Gimpa law student, final year. And I want to piggyback off my father's question on the audit, the external auditing. So from my understanding, an audit is just a tool to verify trust. But as we see in the latest Bank of Ghana fraud reports, there's been a rise in insider-related fraud issues and staff management often bypassing controls and regulations. So my question is, as we're discussing the role of bank boards specifically, are we being honest enough to admit that our problem probably isn't a lack of better rules, or is it a lack of boardroom courage to challenge culture when senior staff probably circumvents the system? Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Yeah. So, yeah, the first one was on board evaluation.
Board evaluation as a tick box exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I've been on a few boards where I've also had to ask similar questions around the effectiveness of the individual evaluation, because there is one that evaluate you, it's shared around the table, peer evaluation. And it's more or less like scratch my back, let me scratch your back phenomenon. As good intentioned as it is, I'm not sure it's a very effective tool in assessing the effectiveness of boards. In my view, it should be what the board has done a lot more in the board deliberations through review of the board minutes, how decisions are taken. I think you can have a lot more insights about the effectiveness of the board than the evaluation process. I mean, that is my personal view, um, which is something that perhaps Mr. Adams is here. You can take it back to the central bank and see how that process can be strengthened. But there has been other boards where third parties have been brought in to evaluate the board, and that has also been, okay, how much can you know? You understand how much, having come in, we've been around for the whole year. We bring you in an off-site environment and we say, this is what we have done, this is the form, this is the work, this is our paperwork, evaluate how we have performed. I think it's a lot, there's a lot of theory and theoretical aspects that, in my view, may not necessarily, if you want to go around it and just tick box, you will still meet the requirements of Bank of Ghana, and really the board may not have been effective. So I think you should go down to the paperwork, what decisions have been taken, how those decisions were taken, how board decisions are carried, and the outcomes of those decisions. And on the last one, which is the audit and the fraud, I think we need to be very clear about the role of the external auditor. Their job is not to detect fraud. It is written there in black and white ink. They are not to detect fraud or error, but they do their processes in a manner that if fraud exists and they come across it, they'll bring it to the attention of management to action it. So it is incumbent on management controls to implement the right controls, policies, and procedures. Management has also implemented procedures to test those systems, whether they are operating as designed. You can have very beautiful controls on paper, but if you don't walk through and understand how these controls are being operated, you find design effectiveness, operating ineffectiveness. So you need to have both in order to arrest fraud and error and to cut that to the barest minimum. The auditors work, if you are lucky and they come across it, it will come, but they design their processes in a manner that if it's pervasive, they will definitely catch a semblance of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so just to pivot from the audit bit of the question, so the auditors work with materiality. And so in their report, they will tell you that where there is material misstatement and that misstatement or the breach is pervasive, then there is a certain responsibility on them. But their work from the word go is not to, pick or detect fraud. Now, you asked your question whether the challenge is a case of no rules or it's just the case that nobody is abiding by those rules. I would say the rules are there. There's a design, as he mentioned. You design your controls. It is the operation of the controls that is the issue. And that's why there's the internal process. In risk management, we call it risk and control self-assessment. Even as you have designed your controls around the risks, there's a process that you yourself will select or sample some transactions and test, so that if you find any defect, you immediately would improve on the control. So that's the bit. And then the question around board evaluation, I know why you asked that the two of us answer, because it can be an appraisal issue for you. So that's just by the way. But look, the corporate governance directive for me has been very, very crafty in the way they regulate banks. So it gives you two levels that you can do the internal evaluation and every other year do the external evaluation. And it goes down to say that the evaluation must be at the individual level. It must be at the committee level. and it must be at the full board level. Now, there is an extent to which you can scratch somebody's back. If the person doesn't come for meetings, you cannot say they came for meetings. And so, attendance, if somebody appeared twice, you can only write twice. And there's a certain check. It always starts with your self-assessment. You would start the process to complete. You sit on risk committee. There were 4 meetings. How many of them did you attend? Mind you, for every committee meetings, there are registers that are maintained. And so if you say you attended all 4, when the register says 1, then you are not fit to sit on the board. So I think that when it comes to the evaluation, it's the quality to which we put to it and the seriousness around it. I have done several evaluations. There's a way you can catch. In my time as an external auditor, I just grab the board minutes. I don't need any other thing. The board minutes, I mean, it tells all the story. I pick all the actions and create a table out of it. I just give it to management. Please complete the status of these actions. If all of them are open, do I need a PhD to say this is an ineffective board? No. So it is the seriousness with which we attach the internal evaluation. Mind you, Bank of Ghana expects you, as part of the disclosure requirement, to publish the result of the evaluation. And that evaluation fee, as a layer, your external auditor may not be permitted to do that. You should get a third party to also come in and do that evaluation and give their report. So in the crafting of the corporate governance directive, I think there were inbuilt checks and balances that would ensure that every single requirement, if you attempt to go around it, another one will catch you somewhere. And so it is not merely a checkbox exercise. If you check the box in year 1, year 2, an external party will come and uncheck the box. Thank you.
Let me ask you my own follow-up question. So what happens to the individual non-performing members of the board? Because the minutes is a collective. And so some persons who may not be performing may be hiding under that. How should they be assessed?
Okay, so I would respond to this from the KIN4's report. And KIN4 is the Corporate Governance Code of South Africa. What Mervyn King has proposed is that if you identify non-performance, there are certain actions. First of all, is it a case of a skill gap? And that's why they recommend that you need to train your boards. Train them. Or is it a case that they are just not interested? You can fire the board. But again, I don't remember any instances of board members being fired and reported, because it says that anytime there is a change, a status change of board member, you need to disclose that. So if the board member resigns, you need to put that. If he's fired, you need to put that. Sometimes it could even be disciplinary action against the board member. But what we see all the time is that when there's a status change, what we put there is what? Resigned. You get it? So Sandra.
Thank you so very much. Distinguished, you have comments before we wrap up?
On the evaluation, the question that AC asked, just to make the point that it's not only the self-evaluation, the corporate governance also requires an external party to evaluate them. So it's a combination of the self-evaluation and the external party evaluation. Yeah. I just had a message. The question on the why the governor is, because it's online, I had a message from a superior of mine who is saying that it's to allow for proactive monetary policy transmission. And that is the major reason why in most or in some central banks you have the governor also acting as the chair. It just will allow for proactive and forward-looking monetary policy transmission.
Commissioner, there's your answer. Thank you. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, our online listeners, we have come to the end of our discussions. This has been a very riveting discussion. We could have gone on easily for another hour. In fact, some of our thematic areas for discussions we have not even ventured on at all due to the time constraints. Our three panelists have exhibited a wealth of sector knowledge and practical market experience, and we really, truly have appreciated their inputs. And so we trust that our discussions this evening has provided some illumination and persuaded all of us that strong boards are not a governance luxury, and that they are in fact a financial stability imperative. The challenge before us is to continuously equip boards, and I'm happy on the note on which we have ended, with training and with the requisite skills, ensuring their independence and judgment that is required and will be required in this increasingly complex financial landscape that we find ourselves in. We appreciate your rapt attention and your incisive contributions and questions. We thank our organizers for putting together this program. And please help me thank our distinguished panelists, Mr. Sina Kamagati, Mr. John Iwa, and last but certainly not the least, Mr. Ismail Adams. I think they deserve a round of applause. I'm Sandra Thompson, and I thank you very much for spending the evening with us, and I bid you a good night and safe onward journey home. Thank you.